Welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Friday, January 29th. I'm Andrew Walworth. Today, President Biden is finishing his first full week in office, during which time he's passed at least 24 executive orders, maybe more by the time you're listening to this, far more than President Trump or Obama did in their startup period. The president was blunt about what he was doing, telling the press that his most recent orders were to, quote, undo the damage Trump has done. President Biden also pledged to reopen public K-12 schools within his first 100 days, even as COVID cases surge. This week, it became clear that teachers' unions would fight to keep schools closed. Meanwhile, parents and students are caught in the middle. And the Senate, which is split 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats, reached a power-sharing agreement based largely on a promise by two moderate Democratic senators that they will resist attempts to get rid of the filibuster. That may sound like inside baseball, but it has enormous ramifications about what part of the Democratic agenda can actually get passed. Joining me to discuss all this are some of my colleagues from Real Clear Politics. Tom Bevan is co-founder and president. Carl Cannon is Washington bureau chief and education editor Nathan Harden. So, Tom, I'm going to start with you. And before we get to the politics, we've got to talk about this little thing called GameStop. What is it? And I know you've got your kids day trading your 401k. So tell us why you're doing this.
Far from the truth. So I have a junior in college, and he signed up on Robinhood a few weeks ago and had been trading, here and there. And he's been in the middle of this thing. He hasn't traded GameStop, but he did have some BlackBerry stock. He did have some Dogecoin, which was the latest iteration. And it's been wild to see this whole thing progress. Look, I think at the bottom of this, it is a larger question, right? Which we saw really come into play in a real way yesterday when Robinhood and a bunch of other trading platforms basically stopped people from being able to buy the stock. Right?
You could only sell, right?
Could only sell. But certainly the fact that you have this situation where short sellers in the market, these big Wall Street hedge funds, are getting their nuts squeezed, right, by these novice investors, on Robinhood in the basement. Some of them, like my son, college kids, young people who have been basically taking stocks and making them viral and putting the short sellers in they're realizing heavy losses in the billions and billions of dollars. And then folks step in and just stop it. They just stop it. It's fine for Wall Street bankers to create even their own set of rules, and as long as they're making money. And when they're not making money and the little guy's making money, suddenly it's something that has to be stopped. It makes no sense. And as you've seen, some of these folks, Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports was on Tucker Carlson last night saying, look, people should go to jail. I mean, there is real anger out there at the way this entire thing went down. And I think this is the beginning of the story, not the end of the story.
Well, Carl, the politics of this are pretty interesting because we all want unity,
and Joe Biden.
Yeah, so two of us. Yeah, right, two of you. But this has brought AOC and Ted Cruz together, agreeing with Tom here that this is wrong and something should be done.
Tom quoted Dave Portnoy, who was on Tucker Carlson. He was also on Twitter, and he said, if you got AOC and Ted Cruz on the same side, you effed up. Mm-hmm. That's what he said. But there's another way to look at that. If the populists on the left and the populists on the right are on the same side, maybe that shows you something else, which is that populist extremism goes around the dark side of the moon and meets on the other side, and they're really the same. These kids who started this to make a little money or to have a little fun ended up, through the power of networks, the internet, manipulating the market. They weren't buying BlackBerry stock and AMC stock because they thought those stocks were undervalued. They were buying those stocks either because they liked the product or to send a message. But it ended up being the same thing, manipulating the market. Tom makes a point that hedge fund guys, including the new owner of the New York Mets, have been doing this for years. And if they're lucky to stay out of jail, they make billions of dollars. And that's not good. But this is the same kind of thing. It's manipulating the market for reasons of personal ideology, to make a little money or just to make a point. But it's the same. That's not really how the stock market's supposed to work. So I don't necessarily agree that if you put Ted Cruz and AOC on the same side, you've made a mistake. Maybe they're wrong.
Well, Nathan, I know you've got 5 kids. I don't know if any of your kids are are trading in these stocks.
They're not old enough to be day traders yet, Andy.
Well, the age.
I saw Mark Cuban said his 11-year-old made money. So
yeah, there you go. To my knowledge, they're not day trading. But Andy, I think that what strikes me about this is it falls in line with this growing distrust of institutions in general among young people. If you want to look at how young people are looking at our electoral process or how they're looking at the media, there's a sense that, these institutions are not worthy of trust. And now it's the financial system that is stacked against the little guy. There's this incredibly powerful populist vein, and you can gather like minds together on a place like Reddit. And, there was a real kind of barbarians at the gate feeling about this. Ironically, I think that was the title of a book about a hedge fund takeover years ago, and now it's been reversed, and it's the little guy who is now taking down these kind of financial raiders. It's really fascinating to see the power that these groups of people now have to actually take down $1 billion hedge fund.
Andy, there's an ideological component to this among young people. More than half of the young people polled in various surveys say variations on the theme that they think socialism is better than capitalism. There's an idea here that short selling itself is a ghoulish device, that the financial markets are rigged, and that hedge fund people don't pay enough taxes, and corporate raiders are bad. And there's a moralism here on the part of these young barbarians, to use that word, that I think is not entirely misplaced.
Look, this is not coming out of nowhere. The populism that exists in the country is political, but you can draw a direct line back to the financial crash of 2008, right? The Great Recession. And what happened then? You had folks on Wall Street who came up with these crazy derivatives so that they could sell and make gobs of money. It was like a virus with no vaccine. And they plugged it into the financial system, and it crashed the entire system. And guess what happened? Taxpayers had to bail them out. And nobody went to jail for it. A couple of people got fired, but not many. And the next year, all of these hedge fund managers and everybody on Wall Street, they were raking in their big bonuses again. Big banks got bigger than ever. So the idea that the system is rigged, this is not new. This is the latest iteration of it. And it has a social media David versus Goliath twist to it that is delicious. But at the same time, to the point that Nathan was making earlier, there is massive distrust in these institutions. And it is on the left and it is on the right. And I think, again, the idea that the solution, right, at least in the short term, that people are going to step in and change the rules in the middle of the game when these day traders are making money and say, nope, we can't do that. And, Ken Griffin and the folks at Citadel and others place phone calls or do whatever. And next thing you know, you're not allowed to buy certain stocks. It's unbelievable. And it's only going to fuel the anger and distrust that's already embedded in the system that really rose up in 2008.
Well, let's move on. First, I want to talk about the president's first week in office. Tom, he signed 24 executive orders or so. These covered a wide range of topics: Paris Accords, Keystone Pipeline, immigration, Obamacare. These are all the issues that he ran on. So is this just business as usual for a new president, or is this executive overreach?
Well, he signed 6 or 7 times more than all the other presidents combined, right, in their first week in office. Dare we say that Joe Biden is breaking norms?
Wait a minute, Tom. Wait a minute. It could just be that Donald Trump is 6 times worse than any other president.
Oh, yeah. Is that the answer? No, look, just imagine if Donald Trump had come in and signed 24 executive orders in 4 days. And again, Biden came in and said, look, I'm laser focused on COVID, right? This is my challenge. So why is he signing executive orders about transgender girls competing in high school sports, immigration? I mean, just across the board, he's signing this flurry of executive orders that are on the Democratic wish list. There's no question about it. And even the New York Times wrote an editorial saying, hey, buddy, let's tap the brakes, because they know that anything he's doing now can be undone at the stroke of a pen by the next president, and that's not going to leave a lasting legacy. And so there's a risk to what he's doing, not only from the standpoint of it being a permanent policy that was put in place by the Congress, but also generating potentially backlash Keystone Pipeline, oil and gas industry, again, we're already seeing pushback from unions in New Mexico and Wyoming. So it's been a busy week. He's done a lot, and we'll see what the consequences of that are politically for him.
So, Nathan, there was this piece today. We ran it in Real Clear Politics. It was from New York Times. It was Michelle Goldberg. And she was calling Biden the first post-Reagan president. I just want to read this quote from her because I thought it was remarkable. This is what she writes. She says, when in his inaugural address, Biden touted unity, he framed it as a national rejection of the dark forces unleashed by his discredited predecessor, not a stale, quote, gang of eight bipartisanship. He takes power at a time when what was once conventional wisdom about deficits, inflation, and the proper size of government has fallen apart. That means Biden, who has been in national office since before Reagan's presidency, has the potential to be our first truly post-Reagan president. So with the caveat that it's only been a week, I mean, is she right? Is this a turning point?
Well, first of all, I feel like I should have heard the soundtrack from Star Wars while you were reading that quote, the dark forces. I think there's a real rush among people, particularly those who were not big fans of Trump, to look at Biden in these sort of glowing terms that maybe gloss over some of the fissures even within his own coalition. Tom mentioned the Keystone Pipeline, and that upset some of the labor unions, which would traditionally be part of the Democratic base. You know, another big issue that he briefly mentioned was this executive order on gender discrimination, which is a controversial issue among a lot of feminists who also make up the Democratic base. One of those, Abigail Shrier, who wrote a book about the transgender craze within the last year, you know, she tweeted about this, saying this would allow biological males who identify as females to compete in women's sports. And she said this is unilaterally eviscerating women's sports, is placing a new glass ceiling over girls. So I'm wondering if this, these glowing post-Reagan descriptions are going to last too much longer, because eventually there's not uniform agreement within Biden's own base. You know, it's easy to unite against your opponent. It's not so easy to stay together once you're in power.
That's a good point. Carl, you're a historian of sorts. Big page turn here going on.
Well, there's two things about it. When you talk about the first post-Reagan president, what that's an allusion to is Reagan's first inaugural address. And he said he won handily, much more of a margin than Biden or Trump won. And he said the economy was doing terribly. Inflation was out of control. It was just a terrible economy. And so he said, in this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. What Biden is saying is, in the present crisis, government is not the problem. Government is the solution. And that's interesting because it sounds sort of radical. And you're talking about a president who ran on a platform of unity, then doing things that are divisive. The policies are divisive. His tone isn't. But that is really like the younger man than him who emerged as his mentor, Barack Obama. Because when Obama ran for president, the way Democrats spoke about Bush, basically their default position was hate speech. The way they talk about Trump, they talked about Bush. Obama didn't talk that way. He was conciliatory. He was healing. He had a soothing, attitude about him. Tom was one of his constituents in Illinois. He actually had this really soothing manner. He was an appealing guy and made you feel comfortable. But that was the tone of his rhetoric. If you listen to what he said, it was straight Democratic Party. He was from the left of the party. It was the liberal base that was his base. That's the same that's true with Biden. And so we sometimes mistake tone for policy. And Biden ran kind of, except for the meltdown during the debate where he yelled at Trump and called him a clown and other names, Biden kind of kept it together during the campaign. He didn't sound as hysterical and extreme as other Democrats. But if you listen to his policy, these things he's doing, it's what he said he'd do. And this is the left half of the Democratic Party, and Biden aligned himself with that. He didn't go all the way. He didn't go Medicare for all. He didn't go socialized medicine. He didn't go all the way on some of these issues, but he staked out a sort of north by northwest stance, if you will, halfway between the left of the party and the far left of the party. And that's how he's governed in the first week. It's only a surprise because of his tone. It's not a surprise because of what he said, because this is what he said he'd do during the campaign.
Tom, what do you think?
As I was listening to Carl's history lecture there, I agree with Carl. I mean, Biden has said the right words as far as unity is concerned, but he also said he was going to be the most progressive president since FDR, and he's putting that into action. It is what the Democratic base wants. All these policies are very, very popular with Democrats. I mean, they want to see the Keystone Pipeline done away with, and so all of the executive orders that he's signed. So he's on firm footing with the base. The question is, again, what can he do legislatively, and will that involve Republicans in any way? And again, we talked about this, I think, last week. You know, there's a COVID package that he wants to get through. There's Republican resistance in the Senate. Will they just say, you know what, screw you guys, we're doing budget reconciliation? Kamala Harris goes in there, slams down the gavel, and it's done. And then immigration reform, right? Are they going to get Republicans on board for that? Would they break it up to get Republicans to vote for some aspects of it and not others? Because when that gets to the Senate, it's a 60-vote threshold. And then the question is, well, are they going to blow up the legislative filibuster and just jam that through? So we're not there yet. And in the meantime, as those things reveal themselves and work their way through Congress, Biden's continuing to do everything he can do as, within the powers of the executive. Although I think a lot of people would question whether some of the things that he's doing are within his powers as the executive. And they're being met by legal challenges and the like. He suffered an early legal setback. And remember, Trump suffered setbacks all over the place legally when he was trying to do things by executive order. So, look, I think Biden is staying true to his promise. The criticism of him from the right during the campaign was that he's just a mouthpiece. He is this moderate facade on a very liberal, progressive agenda, and that he's going to be basically a sort of a figurehead, while the people who are pushing things and pulling the strings are going to be sort of the radical left. I think that seems to be mostly true thus far, in the sense that, like, these policies that he's signing are very much left wing and within where the rank and file Democrats are. But he continues to say, look, I want unity. I want all these things. So at some point, that facade is no longer going to be able to hold up.
Carl, where the rubber meets the road on this, at least this week, was this question of the filibuster in the Senate. The filibuster says that you need 60 votes to move a piece of legislation onto the floor for debate. This week, Mitch McConnell agreed to a power-sharing agreement with the idea that 2 Democratic senators would resist any attempt to change the filibuster. Is that going to hold, you think, A? And tell us about budget reconciliation, because I think that's going to be something that we're going to hear a lot more about in the next couple months, and people probably don't know exactly what it is.
Well, it's a measure. You just need. It's not considered legislation. It's considered budget. It's a separate category, and you can pass a budget with a 1-vote margin, and so you can't theoretically. Well, no, you can't filibuster a budget bill. This was agreed to because there was never had a budget. You would have government shutdowns were getting out of hand. It hasn't made that entirely go away, but it's a better system than they had before. And what the Democrats are saying, well, Bernie Sanders, who's the new chairman of the Budget Committee, says, "Oh, we'll work with Republicans, of course, unless they don't do what we say. Then we'll use the reconciliation process, and we'll get we'll pretend these are budget bills, these changes in policy." So that's actually what passes for compromise and moderation in Washington these days. Is you say you'll work with the other party so long as they do what you want, and if they don't, then they're being obstructionists. So, we have a ways. This new Congress and the 50-50 Senate and the new administration is still feeling their way. Joe Biden does know how to compromise. He's old enough that he came up under the old system. Mitch McConnell knows how to compromise. But what we don't know yet is whether have these muscles atrophied, or are they going to be able to do some of this? And that remains to be seen.
We've been looking at the growth of power in the executive branch of government for many decades in the U.S., but isn't it fascinating, and who would have guessed that the man who set the record for executive orders would have been one whose party also controls both branches of Congress? That's remarkable.
Let me just jump in there and add, as an institutionalist of the Senate, right? This is a guy who says he respects the priorities of Congress and right, the body itself, and here he is signing away.
Well, it turned out he was tainted by his 8 years in the executive branch.
Well, I just want to add one thing about this budget reconciliation process, which I think is very interesting, which is that someone has to decide whether a bill is a budget bill or not. And it's not up to any elected official. Who knows who decides? Nobody, Carl.
You got us, Andy.
The Senate parliamentarian decides what is a budget bill. They have to present it to her. It is a her now. I looked her up. Her name is Elizabeth McDonough. She's got a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from George Washington. She earned her law degree from Vermont Law School in 1988. She's served since 2012, and this is a critical role that she plays. A name to keep an eye on because she's a very powerful person.
Well played, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we try to shed light as well as heat around here. But Nathan, let's talk about this division between the labor unions, the teachers' unions, and the Biden administration on opening public schools. Biden said in his inaugural that he would open schools within the first 100 days, and he's getting pushback from teachers' unions, especially in big urban areas like Chicago, where Tom's kids are in school.
Yeah, this is really a fascinating story if you take it region by region, school district by school district. One of the stories of the week is in a wealthy town of Montclair, New Jersey, where schools were set to reopen this week. And at the very last minute, the teachers staged a boycott of the teacher preparation that would have been norm for reentering in-person education. And suddenly they had to issue a last-minute, email to parents. I'm sorry, I guess we're not coming back to school. And it turns out the mayor of Montclair is also the number 2 man in the state teachers union. So fascinating bit of holding 2 roles there. But Biden did vow to reopen schools in the first 100 days. Presidents promise a lot of things in 100 days, and I think we're going to find that this is largely out of his control. I've seen there's one in Washington where the school district actually took the local teachers union to court to try to force them back into reopening. Here in Tennessee, where I live, the GOP has threatened to defund the school districts of Nashville and Memphis, the 2 largest school districts in the state, if they don't take kids back into in-person learning by February 15th. So a lot of times it is these larger, bluer municipalities that are being more cautious for a host of reasons. I mean, in many cases, these are also the hot spots for COVID transmission, right? But they also tend to be left-leaning. So the teachers' unions have been giving, a lot of pushback. There was an op-ed from a parent in Fairfax County.
Fairfax County, Virginia.
And he says, well, fine. If you're not going to let kids back in school, then stop putting teachers at the front of the line for vaccines. Pick one or the other. And I think he made a pretty good point.
That parent pointed out that on January 14th, the president of the Fairfax County Teachers Union bragged that she'd got her shot, or January 21st, that she'd got her shot a week earlier on January 14th. 6,000 teachers in Fairfax County went to the head of the line, got their vaccinations. They insisted on it. By Valentine's Day, 27,000 Fairfax County teachers will have their vaccinations, but the teachers union won't even commit to going back to school in the fall next term. And yeah, that parent, as Nathan points out, he said, okay, then why did you go to then don't take the vaccine then? Because people are desperate for the vaccine.
Yeah, give it to my great-grandmother instead, right, if you're not going to go back and teach.
Yeah, I think the teachers union is not, the teachers unions are not looking good on this around the country, Andy. I don't know what they're thinking.
Tom, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we do have a situation where here in Chicago where the teachers union's just been obstinate in terms of refusing to go back to school. They've issued a sort of list of demands, which is what hostage takers do, right? All these things have to be met, even though we know, and the CDC reaffirmed just the other day, that it's safe to operate these schools, to have kids in school in person, if you follow protocols, masks, distancing, washing of hands, all that stuff, which we've known for months was doable. And yet still we're not getting kids back in school. Parents are at the end of their ropes. And I mean, the irony is it is the underprivileged kids, right? Socioeconomic, who are suffering the most, right? They are the ones who are most adversely impacted by not being in school. We know that too, and we're seeing the results of it. I mean, it is criminal what we're doing, or what these teachers' unions are doing in terms of, not going back into the classroom. And it's going to have long-lasting effects. There's short-term political impacts about people turning against teachers' unions and what that might mean, but the long-term impacts. I mean, this story of the New York Times about the Nevada school district, the suicides there, was just heart-wrenching. And we're going, we see these stories popping up around the country. We're going to continue to see them. I mean, this is really, not only has it been a lost year academically, it has imposed many bad, unforeseen consequences on kids across the spectrum, right? But probably most seriously among lower income minority students. And we're going to be living with the consequences of this for years.
And the story Tom's talking about there, that's the Las Vegas school district. And they looked at a huge spike in teen suicides over the last year. And that was a major factor in them deciding to go ahead and reopen schools. I mean, personally, I'm sympathetic to people. If it's a teacher who's afraid of the virus, I mean, I don't want to dismiss those concerns as sort of wholly ridiculous or anything like that. But I do think, as I understand the science, as we've looked at the recommendations from the CDC. It does seem to be very safe, and the transmission rates in these schools are very low. So I think what we can measure that. What we can't measure are these other unintended consequences of school closures, and that is, as Tom rightly says, that tends to affect the marginalized kids the most. Those who are coming from a low income situation, those who don't have a support system. We're seeing huge growing gaps, what they call the learning gaps between the haves and have-nots in this. Rich kids, their parents are pulling them out of public school, putting them in private school because they can have in-person learning. Your poor kid's staring at an iPad all day, getting 10% of the normal education he would get. And what is this going to mean years down the road? What does it mean in terms of the mental health of these students? We can't really know that, but we know it's not good. So I think there is a point where we need to make a principled and intelligent decision about what our disease specialists telling us are the real risks. And they're saying pretty consistently that reopening the schools is a safe thing to do. So I don't think that those opposing that among the teachers' unions have a lot of ground to stand on.
And can I just jump in here? Because I think to Nathan's point, if getting kids back in school had been a priority, right, of the teachers unions, I'm not just going to completely dismiss the idea that some of these teachers, especially the older ones, are afraid to go back to the classroom because they don't, maybe they're in a high risk category. That's fine. But couldn't we have come up with a system that allowed younger teachers, right? If you're 40 or younger and you want to go teach, go teach. And if you're 50 plus, those people could get first in line for a vaccine and then go back to the classrooms. Couldn't we have come up with a solution that would have kept keeping kids in school a top priority? And the answer is obviously yes. But there wasn't the willingness to do that on the part of the teachers unions, again, and coming up with these list of demands that are crazy. We're not going to, not a single teacher's going back to teach in person until you do these 22 things that are, meet these positivity rate levels and all this other stuff. When again, we know that having these kids in class in person, if you follow certain protocols, is not a crazy thing to do in terms of, it's not risky in terms of transmitting the virus. So I just think we failed the kids, and it's unfortunate.
Let me add, this is Carl. Let me add one point to what Tom said, or two. The Fairfax County Teachers Union said that it didn't want to go back. It didn't want its teachers back in school until every kid was vaccinated. Now, you understand, this vaccine was not tested on children. So that's saying you just don't want to go back to work. And the other thing is, some of these demands have nothing to do with COVID. In the Los Angeles Unified School District Union issued a series of demands. One of them had to do no more charter schools. They don't want charter schools. Yeah. Well, that's opportunism and cynicism. That's the kind of thing you even the most militant labor union, you expect better behavior than that.
Nathan, I'm going to let you have the last word on today's podcast, and I'm curious as to what you think the consumer reaction is to this. And when I say that, I mean, if you're a parent and you're looking at this, what do you think the long-term impact is on people's view of public education? And Carl mentions charter schools. It seems to me this might increase the drive for alternatives to the public school system as we now have it organized.
Yeah, indeed, it's done exactly that. And we have some polling data that shows that parents' interest in alternative education, whether it's charter schools or private schools, has increased significantly over the last 12 months. And I think there was a little bit of just an opening and a looking behind the curtains, in a sense that parents were suddenly on Zoom, looking over their kid's shoulder at the classroom, and a just a gut check moment for not only, is my kid getting an adequate education now in this virtual environment, but are there better alternatives out there long term? So there are a lot of people who have moved their kids into a charter or private school because they could get in-person learning that way, and a lot of them won't be coming back. Parents are concerned, obviously, about their kids losing a year of good education, but I think what the longer-term story that we'll have to wait and see is this going to be kind of a boon for the school choice movement in general? And I think there's a good chance it will be.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. Lots to look forward to next week. It'll be the second full week of the Biden administration. I want to thank my guests, Tom Bevan, Carl Cannon, and Nathan Harden. And if you want to find out more, check out RealClearPolitics.com, where you'll find polls, articles, op-eds, videos, podcasts representing a wide range of views. And I always recommend reading at least one RCP article from a writer or publication with whom you firmly disagree. It's good mental practice. And thank you for listening. Until next time, for Real Clear Politics, I'm Andrew Walworth.